Welcome to our session, Equity Bottlenecks and Sustainable Transportation Systems. I am Sam Lindgren. I'm an assistant professor of sustainability education in the College of Education down in Urbana-Champaign, where I'm also affiliated faculty in the Granger College of Engineering and in the Women and Genders Perspective and Global Studies program. Please let me also introduce our scribe for the session, Bumsu Lee, also from the Urbana-Champaign campus, where he's an associate professor of urban and regional planning. I'd also like to acknowledge Urban Wild. You can watch their progress making beautiful synthesized notes on these screens all throughout our sessions today, and will be a major component of our wrap-up session, which is sure to be engaging at the end of the day. So in this session, we are going to try to address the following questions. How can we achieve equity in today's transportation systems? How do different users and developers of transportation systems justify costs and benefits associated with transportation in their sectors? And how do these facilitate or create obstacles in equitable transportation systems? And finally, how are diverse voices and perspectives engaged in decision-making at the community, state, and national levels? To get us started, we'll hear from four different panelists today. Nina Idamudia, who is the CEO of the Center for Neighborhood Technology, will be our first panelist. As a Detroit native, she understands firsthand how the built environment shapes the lives of society's most vulnerable. This fuels her passion for empowering people to be change agents through urban planning. Previously, she was Chicago Recovery Plan Director for the city's Department of Planning and Development, where her focus was to ensure equitable grant distribution across 11 critical program initiatives supporting economic revival. Nina is going to speak for 12 to 15 minutes. Time permitting, we'll have time for one or two questions, but we will have some time for a nice robust conversation at the end after all four panelists have spoken. Nina, thank you.
Thank you. And does my 12 minutes start now? Okay. I just want to be very clear so I can keep my time. Hey y'all, good morning. Happy Friday. Excited to be here with you all. So as mentioned, I joined the Center for Neighborhood Technology as the CEO in September. Prior to that, I worked in government for the last decade. I am happy to be on the other side of the bureaucracy, but growing up in Detroit and understanding how the built environment really affected my life, I felt like it was really important to see people in government that looked like me. Once I understood and learned what urban planning was, which wasn't until my junior year of college, I was like, oh, those are the people controlling the strings of my daily life and kind of how I will operate. And what I think about and why I love C&T so much is thinking about how do you create communities that where people can thrive in place if they choose to, right? If they choose to, how can they thrive in place? And I'm excited to talk to you about how government and nonprofits and private entities can work together in order to create communities that thrive. So at C&T, it's an organization that has been around for 45 years in Chicago. It has some heavy hitters like Jackie Grimshaw, who is kind of the mother of transportation policy in Illinois. We created programs like iGo, brought car sharing to Chicago in the 1990s from Germany. We've had green roofs in North Lawndale before it was cool. Like C&T has really been on the cutting edge of a lot of great things, and I'm really excited to have joined such a dynamic group. So C&T is kind of set up in areas of practice. So we have an urban analytics part in which we understand how data-informed methodology is really important. And what we mean by data-informed is infusing kind of qualitative and quantitative. So like those quantitative data points on a map, but bringing in the lived experience to make a more well-rounded approach to how we think about policy and change, really being people-centered, is very, very important for C&T. And that's how we start all of our work, especially around racial equity. Urban resilience, so we think about climate, climate resiliency, so we do a lot of flooding work, we do a lot of kind of air quality work, but obviously we are here to talk about transportation, which is the other part of our kind of area of practice in which we think about the policy of not only the policy, but also where the rubber meets the road in kind of like transportation policy. So I will be diving deeper there, but just know all of these areas are connected. It's to, again, create a community where people can thrive in place if they choose to. All of our programs go back to that singular mission. So I want to talk about how do we approach enhancing the system that we currently have. In the Chicago context, you may have heard of an ordinance called the Connected Communities Ordinance, which was updated from a transit served location ordinance. So this is an ordinance that was created to entice or incentivize development around transit in certain areas. So in 2013, there was an ordinance adopted by the city of Chicago, and what came out of that is that 90% of the TOD developments that happened within our city happened on just the north side. There was none of the activity that was happening on the north side happening on the south and west side, although they have plenty of land to use in order to help enhance those communities. Again, if you write policy and you don't actually embed racial equity in the policy on the onset, thinking about those who are most vulnerable populations, then you get outcomes like this. So in about 2015 or so, Elevated Chicago came to be. Elevated Chicago, C&T is a founding member of Elevated Chicago. There are other organizations like MPC, All Transit. There's lots of, we have a consortium of organizations under the umbrella of Elevated Chicago, and C&T was there from the beginning. And what C&T decided to do is say, hey, we want to put more energy and more time into thinking about our transit system and the land uses around it. And so, since then, we've been able, C&T along with Elevated Chicago have been able to update that ordinance. So the Connected Communities Ordinance was adopted in about 2023 with updates, specifically thinking about the south and west sides and how to incentivize development there. There also are 3 pillars of Elevated Chicago, kind of thinking about people. So how do we do community collaboration? How do we empower residents to speak for themselves? I see us as translators, not as experts. We help to translate the community desires and wants into actionable items that we can then coach our government professionals. And I was one of those. So I worked with C&T when I was in the Department of Planning and Development for the city of Chicago. My relationship started with C&T because the department did not have a person that was dedicated to transportation land uses, and because of my work in Los Angeles working on that exact same topic, they were like, Nina, come take on this special project. And it was amazing starting that relationship, because as I find myself to be, I called myself an agitator from the inside. It's nice to have that inside-outside game. And I say that kind of funny, but this is very much true. In our line of work as professionals in the built environment, especially in government, we really do need people on the inside and we need people on the outside, because that is how we're going to actually make progress towards our shared values of equity, diversity, and inclusion and justice, right? So one of the things that we created with Elevated Chicago, outside of not only influencing and helping to create this new Connected Communities Ordinance, we also created a subgroup called Elevated Works. So that means we're actually working with developers who on the south and west sides, well, we work with developers all over the city, but I will say a majority of these developers are on the south and west sides, who need extra help and capacity thinking about, great, there's an ordinance, how do I actually use this to my benefit? How do I actually go through the process of a zoning change in order to reduce my parking? How do I actually use this new policy to its fullest extent? So we, and C&T is specifically at the center of this, so we have a contract with the city of Chicago to spend their American Rescue Plan dollars. It's a $1 million contract to provide this TA to developers who won an ETOD grant. So through the Lightfoot administration, they put aside $10 million of ARP dollars to support development on the south and west sides, well, the city, but specifically calling out the south and west sides in order to enhance development there. So we provide developers with, especially first-time developers with marginalized identities with support. We provide education and resources to ETOD developers, and we also foster community among the cohort of ETOD developers so that they get to know each other and can rely on each other and kind of build a capacity and kind of community with each other. And then it also advances Elevated Chicago's work, right? Because we're thinking about the policy, but we're also thinking about the people and how do we go soup to nuts, right? How do we actually, we get the policy in, but then how do we actually build the thing and get it out the ground to benefit communities? These are some of the ETOD pipeline projects that we have. So we have pilots in which we got a private philanthropic donation of about $120,000 in which we were able to do micro grants. We worked with the Department of Housing on their LIHTC program to prioritize ETOD development. There was a DPD grant that I just mentioned, that $10 million of ARP funding, RFPs on the south and west sides related to getting more development along transit, the red line extension, the red-purple modernization, and then planning and visioning. CNT also has this ETOD calculator in which it helps practitioners and community members kind of think about the benefits of ETOD in their communities, or if a project is being prospected, a developer can go to this calculator and kind of put in some information, and it will spit out kind of like, yes, this is good, maybe you can improve here, this would be an added benefit. And that's something that we have at CNT, in which we try to make tools that are realistic, that are easy to use, easy to understand, and help to, again, educate people, not that they don't know their lived experience, but to help give them the language to translate to the decision makers that they're trying to get to. Next thing we do is advocating for the system that we need. So how many of you have heard about the transit budget cliff that's coming? I hope everybody, if not, go Google it. Call your state lawmakers. I also sit on the CMAP board. I was appointed by the Lightfoot administration, and I still sit on the board under the Johnson administration. So the plan for action for regional transit is something that that CMAP, our regional planning agency, created in order to think about how do we address this cliff. Now, during that process, CMAP did engage stakeholders and had lots of advisory groups, and our advisory group of community stakeholders really helped us to formulate this plan that we sent down to Springfield that hopefully they will consider very seriously and act on soon. Now, transit needs help. So transit has been underfunded for decades in the Chicago region. We have a growing operational gap that has been exacerbated by COVID. Services have been cut, and as you can imagine, these services have been cut in the communities that need them most. So, ridership has declined, and consequently, there's more roadway congestion, right? So not only are we thinking about our transit system being on the verge of not being able to grow and really help people have access to the city, but we're also seeing the opposite effect, in which people are driving more, and then our climate resilience is also suffering as a cost of that. So there's also a very confusing web of governance for our current system, our transit system. The structure is 40 years old. It's mandated by old formulas that no longer really serve us. And the transit agencies compete for funds instead of collaborating, right? When we think about, if I could take my Venture card and get on everything, right? Or the making fare, going from different systems easier between PACE, Metra, CTA, also making sure that the consistency is accurate, the reporting is accurate, the apps are accurate, and because there's so many different governing bodies, it's a little bit all over the place. So one of the suggestions that CMAP sent down to Springfield is to completely reconfigure this to one transit agency that controls all of these things. Now that is just a suggestion. That is up for lawmakers to decide, but CMAP did I voted yes, send those recommendations down, right? Because again, if we create our transit system for the most vulnerable population, then we are creating a transit system for everybody. And I believe that the system that we have right now does not work, and we need to try something new. And I know that is scary, but we have to really address these problems for the transit system that we need, right? We know because of COVID, it exacerbated a lot of issues that already existed, so people are at least a little bit more aware, and I think we are kind of ending the atmosphere of opportunity to really push through some of these progressive changes, in my point of view. Some of the things that we want to reform is thinking about, how do we get exceptional service? How do we get universal accessible system? How do we make it safe and comfortable? How do we integrate in affordable fares and make sure that there is desirable destination in reach? Lastly, we want to prepare for the system we deserve, right? So, we're working with the system that we have. We're kind of preparing for the system, advocating for the system that we need, and then how do we prepare for the system that we deserve. CNT is currently working on 2 different programs that are kind of intersected. So the Stellar program is a program in which we're working with 13 CBOs and kind of helping to, again, kind of educate but also translate their understanding of how to electrify and decarbonize public transit systems, and getting their input so they have more vested interest and also kind of policy platform to advocate for, but they need more education, just like the rest of us, of thinking about what are the offsets of electrifying our system. Our team program is very similar, in which we're working with community stakeholders to actually develop what a community-centered kind of guide for how they'd like to see the electrification of our transit system. Now, again, I say decide, because on the surface, you can say electrification of our transit system is good, right? Because it is, right? Decarbonization, but there are offsets to that. There are offsets to what do we do about jobs? Or there are offsets to, okay, well, if we go electric, how does that affect the grid? Or how does that enhance the inequity that is going on in the world, in which people are sourcing and exploiting members in the continent of Africa for the sources to electrify things, right? And the reason I bring that up is because you have to think about the offset and be honest about that if we're talking about equity. Equity and efficiency do not always mix, and you have to make a choice, but you just have to have all the information in order to make that choice, and the community should make that choice for themselves. So I'll pause here and give it over to my colleagues to go, but happy to answer any questions after.
So now we'll hear from Dr. Jane Lin, Professor of Civil Materials and Environmental Engineering here at the University of Illinois, Chicago. Jane's research interests lie in sustainable transportation with a focus on environmental sustainability analysis and design of transportation systems via advanced data analytics and systems modeling. She focuses on mobile source emissions and air quality modeling and health exposure analysis, green freight transportation and logistics, and sustainable emerging mobility enabled by information technology. She is also the editor of Transport Policy. Welcome, Jane. Thank you.
Okay, I think this is small. All right, okay. Okay, good morning. So thanks for coming. So now we're going to switch gear a little bit, as the title of my talk indicates. So I'm going to talk about freight transportation, specifically focusing on freight trucks. So when we talk about electrification, most of us, what comes to our mind is passenger vehicles or light-duty vehicles. So I hope throughout my talk, I will address the importance of freight vehicles, freight trucks, and also why it's so hard to electrify freight trucks. So that's the purpose of my talk. So I'll start with a little bit of the overview of the connections between transportation, carbon emissions, air quality, and environmental justice. So I'm sure we're all familiar with the statistics, right? So now, according to the latest numbers from the US EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, transportation is the single biggest contributor to the greenhouse gas emissions, 35% of the total greenhouse gas emissions in the United States. So when we're talking about decarbonizing the economy, we really can't get around transportation, right? So because that's the biggest chunk of the pie. And and also it brings other benefits, the social equity, the health benefits, and the ecosystems as well. So in addition to the greenhouse gas emissions, we don't want to lose sight of other pollutants coming from the transportation sector, right? So these are the list of the pollutants that typically coming from the transportation sector, like the carbon monoxide, the nitrogen oxides, black carbon, the volatile organic compounds, the ammonia, PM 2.5, particulate matter with the diameter less than or equal to 2.5 micrometers, and the organic carbon, the sulfur dioxide, and the PM10. So you see that some of them actually, transportation is a major source of these pollutants. And these pollutants have very significant negative health impact on humans and other well-beings as well. So that's why it's important to also look at not just the greenhouse gas emissions, since we are talking so much about decarbonization, but do not lose sight of other pollutants. So because of the air pollution issues, contributed from the transportation sector, so if we take Chicago as an example, so this map actually shows the air quality and health index in the city of Chicago, 2020. So the green color means it's good health index, meaning this place, relatively speaking, it have good public health, not so much impact from the air quality. But the red color means it's a bad condition in terms of the health impact of air pollution. So you can see that the north side of Chicago, as we know, tend to be the healthier neighborhoods. The wealthier neighborhoods so have the better air quality and health index, and the south side and the southwest side tend to have worse air quality and health index, and that really correlates very well with the income level. So this is actually 2017 income by the census tract level throughout Chicago. So you can see that if you look at these two maps side by side, so this air quality health index really corresponds very well with the income, right? So this the south side and the southwest side of the Chicago really have majority where the low income neighborhoods are, and the north side the wealthier neighborhoods, and they tend to enjoy better air quality and health. So then I'm gonna focus on zoom into freight transportation. So why I care about freight transportation, and because majority of the literature or the focus is on passenger vehicles and light-duty vehicles, but really I'm trying to make a case here that freight vehicles are actually disproportionately contributing to the problems of greenhouse gas emissions and air pollutions. So if we zoom into the transportation sector, I showed you before, transportation contributes 35% of the total greenhouse gas emissions. But within the transportation sector, if we look at the contribution by mode of transportation, so not surprisingly, the passenger vehicle and the light-duty vehicles contribute majority of the greenhouse gas emissions, right? The 58%. And then you look at the medium and heavy-duty trucks, that's 23%, so slightly less than the passenger cars and light-duty vehicles. So that's probably why we tend to focus more on the smaller vehicles. But I want to emphasize the fact that if we look at in terms of the vehicle population, so the medium and heavy-duty vehicles only is composed of 6% of the total vehicle population in the United States. So 6% of the vehicles, but they contribute 23% of the greenhouse gas emissions. So you can see why that is so important, that we need to, this is the time to look at the greenhouse gas emissions and other pollutions from the medium and heavy duty vehicles or trucks. And as I want to again emphasize the fact, the reason is that even though it's a very small portion of the vehicle population, but if you look at the diesel heavy-duty vehicles versus the gasoline light-duty vehicles, the per mile, the grams per mile emissions many times higher for the diesel heavy-duty vehicles compared to the light-duty gasoline vehicles. That explains the statistics I showed in the previous slide that really, so the medium and heavy-duty vehicles disproportionately contribute to the problem in the transportation in terms of greenhouse gas emissions and other pollution. And to make things worse, so actually we see that the truck traffic has gone up in the recent years, especially after the pandemic or during and after the pandemic. So the figure on the left shows prior to the pandemic, the Illinois urban truck VMT, the vehicle miles traveled between 2012 and 2018. So you see the steady increase in the truck traffic, right? So one of the orange line is the multi-unit trucks, and then the gray line is the single unit truck, and then the yellow line is the total of truck traffic in Illinois. So you see, we already see this static increase before the pandemic. So during the pandemic, as we all experienced, so what happened when we got stuck at home? So we did a lot of online shopping, right? So we click, 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 and everything was delivered. So guess who delivered these things? So we have a lot of trucks, especially a single unit truck. So this figure actually I borrowed from CMAP. It shows during the pandemic when people were working from home or just get grounded at home. So the passenger vehicle traffic went down during that period. But if you look at this orange line, that's the single unit truck. It actually gone up during the pandemic, and the trend continues. Okay, so that's a big issue because now we're replacing the smaller vehicles on the street with these bigger vehicles, right? Which also contributes to more space taken from the road and congestion and so on. So that's an issue. So obviously to solve this problem, one of the solutions we all know is the electrification, right? So according to one of the DOE studies, so obviously by electrifying the vehicles, we can actually reduce the oil dependency by 30 to 60%, and greenhouse gas emissions reduction by 30 to 45%. And then another EPA study in 2020 is showing that there's huge health benefits by electrifying the fleet, right? So the next part of my talk is going to look at, okay, so if we're going to electrify the freight vehicles, freight trucks, so what are the barriers? So in my talk, I'm going to focus mainly on the long-haul freight trucks, but a lot of findings can also apply to the urban scale, the short-haul vehicles in this context. So just want to bring up this map to show that one of the problems is the lack of charging infrastructure for long-haul vehicles or long-haul trucks or trucks in general. So this map actually shows the FHWA, Federal Highway Administration's EV corridors. So the solid line, the solid black line, shows the EV-ready corridor, meaning you can actually drive the EVs on these corridors, okay? And then the dashed line shows the pending ones. So these are planned but not yet able to facilitate EV driving. So you can see that this black lines are really spread around here and there, but they are not really connected throughout the country, right? So if I want to go from Chicago to West Coast, I probably won't be able to really drive my vehicle through these corridors, any of this highway system. Not to mention for trucks, that would be an even bigger problem, right? Because truck needs much more battery capacity in order to go long distance from coast to coast, right? So that's the current situation in terms of the charging infrastructure in the United States, the national highway system. So this is my list of some of the major barriers, but I'm sure you probably have more to add to this list. So the first one is as I alluded to earlier, the insufficient policy incentives, because majority of the investment are focused on the electrification of the small vehicles, the passenger vehicles and the light-duty vehicles. Not so much focusing on the trucks, especially for long-haul trucks. So I think we need to do more to really incentivize this policy, this investment and policies to encourage the adoption to electric trucks. And then obviously the lack of charging infrastructure, as I already showed in the previous slide, and the high initial adoption cost, and a long battery charging time. So I'm going to actually focus on these three highlighted points. So based on one of the recent publications me and my students. So we looked at like how can we address this challenges, right? These three challenges. So I'm going to skip the methodology, how we did it, because that's not the focus of this talk in this context, but rather I will jump right to the major findings of our study. So there are some key points here. The first one, I want to emphasize that it is technologically feasible to deploy this EV corridors for the long-haul trucks, okay? So as an alternative to diesel trucks. So operationally speaking, it is technologically feasible to do so. And in fact, the benefit of using e-truck is that it brings about 43% of the energy saving for switching to e-truck. But obviously, there are a lot of barriers or bottlenecks to overcome. The one, as I mentioned, is in our study we show that the initial adoption of e-truck is really high. So it's pretty much doubling the cost of buying a diesel truck. Okay, the diesel counterpart, and also the prolonging the charging time is really problematic because if you have a longer journey time because you have to stop to charge for long-haul trucks, that is a cost, right, to the operator or the drivers. So you're talking about, because of this prolonged journey time, so over 37% increase in terms of the operating cost. And also, we did a small scale study to look at the relative operation between diesel truck and the e-truck. So you're talking about 2 to 3 e-truck in replacement of 1 diesel truck, right? So that's really the critical problems. And other things we didn't consider, obviously, the vehicle to grid integration. So I'm going to skip. I have more slides, but I'm going to just skip. But if you're interested, I can show more of this results. So just to summarize some of the key points I mentioned. So I think there's a shift in the traffic composition, as I mentioned, especially after the pandemic. So we have an increased amount of truck traffic on the highways and roadways because of the growth in e-commerce. So, and trucks are replacing passenger vehicles. And obviously they consume more energy and emit higher pollution, right? So, and a number of challenges in terms of the infrastructure requirement, the initial adoption of e-truck, especially for the small owner-operator fleets. So that's really a very, very high bottleneck for them to overcome. And the prolonged journey time in terms of the requirement for charging, that's really a big barrier for adoption. And obviously the vehicle grid integration, we didn't really talk about that. And the environmental justice concerns along with this electrification. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Jane. Our third panelist this morning is Sophie Young, Manager of Environmental Justice and Equity in the Electric School Bus Initiative at the World Resources Institute. An environmental and community planner, she works on advancing a just transition for school bus electrification, advising teams on equitable research methods, stakeholder engagement, and program design. She previously led a climate and environmental justice grant program, Transformative Climate Communities, at the California Strategic Growth Council. She was also an environmental planner on transportation and land use projects. Welcome, Sophie. Thank you. Okay. This one? Oh, this one. Oops. Giving away. Hold on. Okay. Morning, everyone. So today I'll discuss how we are working on a specific transition for electric school buses within
medium and heavy-duty vehicles on ensuring that this transition does not leave underserved communities behind. So first, I'll give an overview on where we are today on the current state of adoption for electric school buses, and then share some research insights from our work. Before that, I'll just introduce our organization in case you're not familiar. World Resources Institute. You might know them as a think tank. They like to also call themselves a think and do tank. So, we have the research publications that people often see, but we also do a lot of project work, providing technical assistance, doing stakeholder convenings, and working with different stakeholders. The Electric School Bus Initiative is a project within WRI, and it has been around since 2020, and it's piloting a systems approach to transitioning the electric school bus market. And we're doing this by working with several different stakeholders seen here. We have a goal of electrifying, a moonshot goal of electrifying all school buses by 2030, but as you'll see, that will need to be adjusted. And then underlying all of this is just making sure that it is an equitable transition. So just to give a snapshot, currently there are 480,000 school buses in the US. Only 1% are on the road are electric, but there has been some progress recently, and it is in all states except one at the moment. And some opportunities that we see for electrifying school buses, there are the health and cognitive outcomes for children who are riding the buses and who are more susceptible to the emissions impacts. Also contributing to cleaner air in high volume corridors. Electric school buses, or school buses play a small role in that larger fleet. And then also looking at potentially the role that electric school buses can play in providing kind of a transition more largely for the medium and heavy duty vehicle, build out of manufacturing and battery development. And then we're also piloting some projects around grid resiliency and seeing if electric school buses, which have more predictable routes and are parked for predictable amounts of time, can provide some sort of battery storage to schools or to the grid. And then also, of course, the decarbonization opportunity. We've estimated that if the entire fleet is electrified, it would be the equivalent of taking 2 million cars off the road. So a lot of these challenges will be familiar to all of you in this space, and then specifically for school buses, it is a very high upfront cost for the bus itself, even though the long-term total cost of ownership is lower. The current sticker price for buses is about 3 times that of a diesel bus. And then, of course, the long lead-up time for infrastructure development at school districts and working with the utilities, and then giving familiarity to school districts on learning this new technology, especially in the face of a lot of myths around range anxiety, and then, of course, the need to scale quickly. And then underlying all of this is, of course, as you've heard in these previous panels today, that if not done right, it can disproportionately impact underserved communities. And so here are some stats, that have also been previewed earlier. On the disproportionate impacts, more low-income students ride the bus compared to non-low-income students. And then, of course, communities of color are exposed to more particulate matter from on-road sources of pollution. And then we also know that there are other equity intersections to consider. So just to pull out a couple, on mobility equity, disabled students ride the buses longer, and then they also spend more time on the bus, travel longer distances. And then in terms of geographic equity, we've seen in some of our research that I'll show that tribal communities also experience more delays and more student absences due to poor infrastructure, road conditions. So the approach, as I mentioned, that we're taking is working across all these systems. So all these, I guess you would call them gears, represent kind of a different team working with different stakeholders. We have a team providing school districts with technical assistance, with manufacturers on some issues around the battery supply chain, and then also standardizing specifications. Also with electric utilities, financial institutions to try to find some financing solutions. And then also pushing on federal and state policy, as well as working with a lot of local communities that are advocating for these changes. Just to give kind of an overview of some of the project partners that we work with, a lot of nonprofits, community-based organizations, as well as some consultants, government organizations. So next, I'll give an overview on where we are on equitable school bus electrification. I'll cover a couple types of work streams. One is on the data that we are maintaining. So we have several data sets. One key one is on electric school bus adoption. So you can see here that the adoption is across the entire United States, except for that one state in gray. And then leading states for commitments are California, Maryland, and New York, and a lot of this is driven by actually some of the state policies and funding for electric school buses. We're also seeing that it is, that buses are in across all types of communities. And then some additional data, I guess, just to paint the picture. So like, what does 1% of the fleet mean? It does, it's still equivalent to 69,000 children riders and about 6,000 schools on the bus. So under current federal and state policy targets, it would cover about 32% of the fleet transition. And that is currently represented by about $9 billion in committed funding at the federal and state levels. One thing to note about the state funding, though, is that about $1.8 billion of that is from California at the moment. And this is a bit hard to parse, but these are bar graphs from the data set that we maintain. So if you look at the far left, focus on the far left, there are two sets of graphs. The one on the left is all the distribution of school buses, all school buses by race. So school districts with percent people of color. And then on the right-hand side are the electric school buses, in also divided by school districts by percent of people of color. So if you focus on that blue section, that is the fourth quartile. So those are school districts with the highest percent of people of color. And then you can see that there is higher adoption rates in those school districts by race, and then also by income, low income, and then air pollution, particulate matter 2.5. This is largely thanks to a lot of public funding that is for electric school buses that is centering equity. So we have the federal Clean School Bus Program by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency that has prioritization criteria for rural, low income, and tribal communities. And then at the state level, there are a lot of these equity provisions as well. But we know that, target rates are not enough. So our team has also been, our policy team has also been working with the Alliance for Electric School Buses, which is a national coalition of CBOs, community-based organizations, and to develop this policy playbook. So other types of policies that they're also advocating for are around providing sufficient technical assistance, workforce policies that would accompany these investments, and responsible supply chains. And then in the next section, I'll go over some of the kind of qualitative research that we're doing on the equity implications of the transition. So in addition to that baseline research that we're looking at for adoption, we're also looking at specific stakeholders and what their perceptions or experiences are with the transition. All of this is framed by an equity framework that was published that kind of drives this research agenda, but also a lot of the project activities. On the far left, you'll see that we conducted a baseline stakeholder analysis that looked at 4 communities in particular: environmental justice, tribal rights and justice, disability rights and justice, and health equity communities, to understand what their exposure to this transition and what their interests are. And then based on that, we are developing a couple more targeted working papers, one on disability justice and one on tribal justice. And then we are also working on an analysis of technical assistance providers. If you're familiar with the Clean Cities Coalitions funded by the Department of Energy, who are providing a lot of technical assistance on fuel transitions at the local level. There have also been some surveys done on school districts and what their needs are in this transition. And then we have a report coming out also on looking at the school bus depot siting. So some of the challenges that were mentioned earlier also came out in this research, and then just provided a little more specificity around the grid infrastructure needs. And then it also pointed out, I think, a lot of the issues on the ground, in particular with the technical assistance providers were able to provide insights into, the challenges that they're facing implementing the Justice 40 initiative or a lot of these equitable policies and equity mandates. We try to steer away from the word mandates, but policy incentives and requirements. And so they have expressed that there's a lot of need for more education on what these definitions are and more consistency around the definitions to really help communities to do it. And then, of course, there's a lot of local on-the-ground political realities, right, that have to kind of interface with these policies and getting people's buy-in. Also, we heard that during deployment, that they could include more underserved communities at the table to really understand what their needs are. And then on these community-specific challenges, I wanted to just point out a couple high-level findings initially from the research that we have. So on this paper that we're doing with this tribal justice, we see that actually this roadmap, this quote-unquote roadmap to electrification is longer for tribal communities because they face additional kind of basic infrastructure challenges in addition to historical governance challenges with jurisdictions related to kind of US Indian law and the school system. So we're working to develop a legally and culturally appropriate framework to support tribal communities specifically on their transition and why they're not able to access all of the funding currently. And then with the second paper on disability justice, what we heard is that disability communities are often separated in transportation, and they would actually like to be on the same buses as everyone else, kind of like you have in public transit systems, right, where you have ADA accessible buses. And then they also express that they don't feel, prioritized and included in bus design. So, we're familiar with, there are already issues with like wheelchair ramps, et cetera, but there are other sorts of disabilities. They may be sensitive to noise or, texture. We also heard from some of the youth respondents. So kind of trying to expand the view of accessibility and maybe, not just transitioning disability communities, the same way as everyone else, but also they were presenting these ideas around like expanding like what is possible in this transition if you have the opportunity. And then for rural communities, they are more likely to have older diesel fleets, and so this is kind of pointing to some potential future research. Just to highlight some of the opportunities we heard, so despite a lot of these challenges, what we did hear, though, was that school districts were interested in electric school buses. They're really excited about the children's health benefits. That really resonates with school districts and kind of cuts across political lines. And the drivers are also excited about, and like the transportation directors are excited about, lower operating expenses and cleaner rides. So my time's up, so I'll end on this, but on how we can address these bottlenecks, just to say that one thing that we really want to make sure with this research is that it is reaching the people that need it. So one, we are releasing these publications with digestible articles. We also have a working group helping us to identify communities that we want to make sure to partner with or have outreach to reach them. And then also within our project, all these project teams, making sure they're integrating this into their work with all of these stakeholders in the ecosystem, with school districts, utilities, financial institutions. And then updating our resources. So we have this big library of resources that a lot of school districts use, and just making sure that all these equity considerations are included in there. And then I'll end just by showing some of these research questions that have been uncovered through this kind of exploratory research and that we hope to potentially explore in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophie. Our last panelist for this session this morning is Joanne Zhou, Group Manager of Vehicle and Energy Technology and Mobility Analysis at Argonne National Laboratory. Joanne assesses energy and emissions impact of advanced vehicle, fuel, and mobility technologies. She also analyzes market and technology trends for transportation electrification in the United States and in China. Her research interests include vehicle technologies, alternative fuels, freight modes, energy systems and technologies, mobility trends and behaviors, for example, travel and refueling from local, regional, and national system perspectives. Joanne, thank you so much.
Do I still have time? Oh.
Yeah, you have
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for the introduction. So again, I'm with Argonne National Lab. I'm an analyst there, also group manager. So today I want to talk about some of our equity analysis capability, how we tackle the sustainable transportation from the equity angle with our analytical capabilities. I noticed that everyone talked a little bit about the organization, so I do have a slide, but it was in the backup. Just in case you don't know, we're actually in the neighborhood, so we are in the suburb of Chicago. Argonne National Lab has about $1 billion operating budget every year, and we have over 3,000 employees. Half of them are scientists and staff engineers, and we host a lot of facility users like the supercomputers and also the X-ray facility. They have a lot of facility users across the global. And we have research like postdoctors as well. So if you're interested in our research and want to join us, please let us know. I'll go back to my talk. Okay. So Argonne National Lab, we support Department of Energy. For my team, we primarily support Vehicle Technology Office and other type of technology office. For DOE, they released, last year they released the U.S. National Blueprint for Transportation Decarbonization. In that blueprint, they identified the potential for different transportation sectors, how they can be electrified and to achieve the zero emission future. In that report, they also highlight that decarbonizing the transportation sector while addressing equity will be the key to ensure better outcome for everyone. And DOE has issued Justice 40 policy priority, which has 8 policy areas. Here today, I'm only focused on 2 things that we do that are aligned with the policy priority. One is the financial burden, which transfer to energy burden, and also the environmental burden, that's the air pollution. And I also I don't have the slides, but I also want to emphasize when we talk about equity analysis, normally people talk about the 3 types of equity analysis, or sometimes it's 5. It's a distributional equity impact. So what is distributional impact when you have a given scenario of a technology adoption and deployment? There's a procedure equity that's talk about in the procedure, how you include everyone, how you be fair and equitable. There's also interactional equity. That's talk about how you interact with each other in an equitable way to be fair, to respect each other. Most of our analysis focus on the distributional impact. We quantify the energy, emission, equity impact to the local communities with a given scenario of technology adoption and deployment. So again, like I said, I want to focus on the financial burden, environmental burden. So that transfer to energy burden in our perspective, supporting Department of Energy. You also can call it energy affordability. I won't go into the detail of the function, but I want to emphasize when we talk about the burden, it's not just the cost, it's the percentage of the income that a community has to pay for certain technology. When we talk to OEM industry partner, they always also talk about how we reduce the cost. That's not enough because the distributional impact to the community with even the same cost is different because the household income are different. So when we talk about the transportation energy cost burden, we talk about the household annual income, the percentage of household annual income paid for the vehicle fuel in order to fulfill the annual travel. For a given household, if they have a certain type of socioeconomic factor, they have a number of kids, they have a number of seniors in the household, they have a given travel demand per year. And with the gasoline, they have to, gasoline price or electricity price, they have to pay, and also the vehicle efficiency, then the household miles traveled divided by the household income, that's what we call the transportation energy burden. And then nationally, the average is about 3.3%. Means average household only spends 3.3% of their income on transportation fuel, the vehicle fuel, in order to fulfill the annual travel. However, that percentage could go over to 20% in some community for some household. As shown in this chart, that is grouped by household income. And in the lowest bin, that is lower income, and you can see there's a large variation, and it could reach to 20%. It means they have to spend 20% of their income in order just to go to the places they need to go. So this one, the map is hard to see in this scale, but it definitely shows that in the urban area, households tend to have a lower transportation energy burden, and the rural area tend to have a higher transportation energy burden. And we found out the contributing factor is actually the vehicle efficiency. So when the household has a similar socioeconomic factors, means they need to travel the same mileage every year. So the contributing factor make them facing higher burden is actually the vehicle efficiency. If the rural community, the low-income community, tend to drive low-efficiency vehicle, as mentioned by several other speakers already, that is the reason they have to spend more and face a higher burden. So this tells the Department of Energy that if they can promote a high-efficient vehicle adoption, this could be electric vehicle, but it also could be a newer vehicle that has more energy efficiency. They could have a larger impact to reduce the energy burden in the United States. This one just shows, get you to my point, the vehicle efficiency. Here we are showing the MPG, and that is the one indicator of a vehicle efficiency. We can use the Washington, D.C., which is on the right side of the map, Washington, D.C. As an example, that you can see, if you're familiar with Washington, D.C., that you know the northern part, the light color part, that's the higher income community, and this part is the lower income community. And you can see that in the lower income community, the vehicles are much, much older than the community is richer. So that translates lower efficiency for those vehicles, and that's why the household live there face higher energy burden. And that's the map showing, again, same message. In the urban area, you can see the lights that highlight the urban area that tend to drive efficient, newer vehicle, and the large rural area, sometimes lower income communities, they have an older and low efficient vehicle, and that's why they face the higher energy burden for transportation. And when we improve the energy efficiency, that even we can save the household a lot of money. That even just look at from 2016 to 2018, just look at the efficiency change in the vehicle technology. So that's one of the mission of the Department of Energy to improve the technology efficiency. So just look at the 3 years vehicle efficiency change, that can save the American household over $8 billion in the vehicle fuel. However, the point is that distributional impact is not a distribution, is not fairly distributed among the household and community. And that's our mission, to address how to promote high efficient vehicle adoption with lower cost in the low income community and rural communities. So we have this tool and speak about the fuel efficiency and also the fuel saving by zip code, by community. So we recently developed a tool for the Department of Energy, which is on energy.gov website, that for users for their own zip code, they can quantify how much they can save annually when they switch from a conventional vehicle to a comparable EV with a very representative household travel behavior. So for each zip code, we have a default gasoline price and also default household annual miles. That, like I said, each zip code may have a different socioeconomic factor that translate the different mileage you have to travel. Even with same income household, if you live in downtown Chicago or suburb Atlanta, you have a very different annual miles, and you pay very different gasoline price. So that transfer to different fuel saving, and this is the website you can go and use our default value, or give you your own customer the value to calculate the saving. In general, the annual fuel saving could be over $2,000 when you switch from the conventional vehicle to electric vehicle. And the emission benefit is also significant. We found out that half of the population living in the United States driving a BEV can save probably 380 CO2 equivalent per mile. Okay. So that's about environment burden. So I want to also emphasize that on the policy side, I understand that right now infrastructure is a barrier for EV adoption. When you promote EV, people don't see the infrastructure available for them to charge. It's hard to convince them to adopt. So the IRA, the Treasury, U.S. Treasury, they have IRA 30C policy to promote infrastructure deployment with a focus on low-income and non-urban area. So this is for both individual and fleet charge infrastructure deployment. Argonne has been helping DOE and also Treasury to understand the implication of a different definition of non-urban, because non-urban is not defined at a zip code level. However, income is. So based on different definition of non-urban versus urban, you have a very different implication for what census tract and what zip code would be qualified for the incentive. Especially, this is the conflict especially exists in the suburb area, for example, the Chicago suburb area. They could be urban or non-urban, depends on how you define it, and that's the location. For example, large truck will reside in the future, and they need a charging station to electrify their fleet. So we also support the federal agencies in quantifying the emission benefit of infrastructure deployment. So I just talked about the incentive to deploy the infrastructure. We also have tools that to quantify the emission benefit for a given location of infrastructure deployment. So A-Fleet is a tool, as you can tell from the name, is for a given fleet. So for example, if UPS in the zip code want to transfer all their delivered truck from diesel to electric trucks, the fleet manager may ask how much money I have to pay for 10 years or 20 years. What is my size of price means the emission I can reduce, right? So A-Fleet is the tool designed for that kind of calculation, and it's called out in the bipartisan infrastructure law, ask people to use Argonne's A-Fleet tool to quantify the emission benefit of alternative fuel infrastructure deployment that not only EV, but also hydrogen and biofuel infrastructure. So just give you an example of the analysis that can be done. Again, I won't go into the details, but this is an example that using A-Fleet for a given location, this is one in Virginia, that if we know the charging type, the charger station that to be deployed, what kind of charging station that is, with certain assumption of utilization. Utilization means how much of a time of the 24 hours a day the charger will be used, and also the generation, the electricity generation, where the electricity come from, right? Because people argue EV might save the emissions in the end use, but the electricity come from some place that still have a pollution. So with certain assumption of a generation mix that we quantify not only the GHG emissions, but also the NOx and the PM2.5. So in this case that you can see it does save the GHG emission, but it has some negative impact on the NOx and on the NOx pollution. So this is heavily depends on the generation mix and also the charger utilization. One more thing I want to mention is when we talk about the transition from electric vehicle to, conventional vehicle to electric vehicle, people always ask then, okay, what is the economic impact to the community? So that's another Justice 40 policy priority is to improve the jobs, the job access to clean energy manufacturing, and also the job force training needed. So at Oregon, we also supported Department of Energy to quantify the jobs impact of electric vehicle manufacturing and the charge infrastructure deployment. When it comes to this manufacturing deployment, it's not just how the station is operating. There's an entire supply chain need to be considered. When you see a vehicle running down the road or a charging station is operating, this upstream manufacturer goes to that. So EV is coming from different component, battery is coming from different cell and a pack together, and then goes to, for example, charging station or goes to vehicle assembling plants. They operating, they sell energy, they sell product, but they also burn energy, electricity, the energy, and then the induced economic activity need also captured to the local community. So this is the tool that we designed for DOE to quantify the entire supply chain. What will be the job created when you have a different electrification scenario? I think that's the end. I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.